I'm Alexandra, 32 years old and a captain in the U.S. Army Special Forces. Yesterday, I walked into my sister Jessica's wedding alone, still adjusting to civilian clothes after 8 months in combat fatigues. The moment I entered, Bradley's family turned, whispered, and laughed behind manicured hands. I stood taller, my military posture a shield against their judgment. What they didn't know was that underneath my simple blue dress were scars from serving our country and a silver star for valor. Before I continue my story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below, hit that like button, and subscribe to hear more stories of unexpected triumph. Growing up, Jessica and I were inseparable despite being completely different. She was always the social butterfly with flowing blonde hair and a talent for making everyone feel special. I was the tomboy with practical short hair and an intense focus that eventually led me to West Point instead of following her to fashion school. Despite our different paths, we promised to always be there for each other's big moments. When Jessica called me 18 months ago crying with happiness about meeting Bradley, I was in the middle of training for my 3rd deployment. I still remember sitting in my barracks, smiling as she described this perfect man she'd met at a charity gala. Bradley came from old money, with a family name that appeared on buildings across the city. He was kind, ambitious, and looked at Jessica like she hung the moon. "Alex, I think he's the one," she had whispered into the phone. "If he makes you happy and treats you right, then I'm happy for you," I responded, genuinely pleased for my sister but already calculating how my deployment schedule might impact attending their eventual wedding. My career in the military wasn't just a job but a calling. As one of the few women in Special Forces, I had worked twice as hard to earn my position. My most recent deployment to Afghanistan involved a classified operation that I couldn't discuss, even with Jessica. What I could never tell her was how our team had rescued 3 aid workers while under heavy enemy fire, or how I'd received the Silver Star for leading the extraction when our commander was wounded. The physical scars from that mission were still healing when Jessica called with her wedding date. A jagged line across my left shoulder and a still tender spot on my right side where shrapnel had been removed were my private reminders. The emotional scars were less visible but equally present. Loud noises still made me flinch, and I found civilian conversations about trivial matters increasingly difficult to engage with. "I've set the date for May 15th, Jessica had announced excitedly. "You'll be back by then, right?" "I need my maid of honor." My heart sank as I checked my deployment calendar. "Jess, I'm so sorry, but I'm scheduled to be in country until May 10th. I'll do everything possible to make it back for the wedding, but I might miss the rehearsal dinner and bachelorette party." Her disappointment was palpable even across thousands of miles. But she rallied quickly. "As long as you're there on the actual day, that's all that matters. Bradley's family is handling most of the planning anyway." That was my first clue that the Marshall family was taking control of my sister's wedding. Over the following months, during our sporadic calls, Jessica mentioned changes to her original wedding vision. Her bohemian garden party was transformed into a formal ballroom affair. Her dream of a small bridal party expanded to include Bradley's 3 cousins whom she barely knew. "They have expectations about how things should be done," Jessica explained when I questioned these changes. "Bradley's mother Margaret has been planning her son's wedding since he was born, according to family tradition." During my pre-deployment leave, I finally met the Marshalls at an engagement dinner. Walter Marshall, Bradley's father, barely acknowledged my profession, instead focusing on asking which country club my parents belonged to. Margaret Marshall surveyed my practical haircut and minimal makeup with thinly veiled disapproval. Bradley's brother Connor made jokes about women in uniform that walked the line between humor and disrespect. "Just be patient with them," Jessica had pleaded when I expressed concern about their attitudes. "They're traditional, but they're going to be my family." When my deployment was extended by 2 weeks due to operational necessity, I missed not only the rehearsal dinner, but also the bridal shower and final dress fitting. I landed on American soil just 36 hours before the ceremony, exhausted and still mentally processing everything I'd experienced overseas. Jessica called me from her hotel suite the night before her wedding. "How are you feeling about tomorrow?" she asked. I'll be there with bells on, I promised, military punctuality deeply ingrained. Though I might still be running on Afghanistan time. There was a pause before she spoke again. Alex, I should warn you. Bradley's mother has made some comments about you coming alone. She's very big on appearances and proper couples at the head table. I'm sorry my combat deployment interfered with her seating chart, I replied, more sharply than intended. I know. I told her it's completely unreasonable to expect you to bring a date when you've been serving overseas. Just, maybe prepare yourself for some comments. They don't really understand military life. I've faced Taliban fighters, Jess. I think I can handle some disapproving in-laws. We both laughed, but there was tension underneath. Jessica quickly changed the subject to details about the venue and schedule, but I could sense her anxiety about worlds colliding. Before we hung up, she turned serious again. Alex, no matter what happens tomorrow, know that I'm so proud of you and everything you do. Bradley is too, even if his family doesn't get it. As I hung up, I felt a familiar determination settling over me. This mission objective was simple: be there for my sister on her big day, regardless of the obstacles. Little did I know that the next day would test my diplomatic skills more thoroughly than any international peacekeeping mission. The Marshall Reynolds wedding was held at the Grand Magnolia Hotel, a historic landmark dripping with crystal chandeliers and old-world opulence. I arrived precisely 45 minutes before the ceremony, dressed in a navy blue cocktail dress I'd purchased during my 36-hour window between landing and the wedding. While the dress was elegant, it lacked the designer labels and custom tailoring that clearly distinguished the other guests milling about the ornate lobby. I checked my appearance once more in a gilded mirror, noting how my military posture made me stand differently from the women air-kissing nearby. My hair, though recently trimmed to meet regulations, was styled as femininely as its short length allowed. The small scar near my hairline was barely visible with makeup, but I knew it was there. 3 tours of duty were written in my bearing, in my vigilant eyes, in the way I automatically positioned myself with clear sight lines to all entrances. Alexandra Reynolds, a wedding coordinator with a clipboard, approached. We have you seated at table 19 for the reception. I nodded, recognizing the number as likely far from the main family tables. And for the ceremony? Bride's side, back row. She replied without looking up. The front rows are reserved for immediate family and couples. Before I could respond, I caught sight of Margaret Marshall across the lobby, resplendent in a champagne-colored gown that probably cost more than 3 months of my military salary. She was speaking to an elegant older woman while glancing repeatedly in my direction. I didn't need my intelligence training to read their expressions and whispered comments. Such a shame Jessica's sister couldn't bring a proper date. Military women always have such difficulty with relationships. So masculine, the way she stands. I straightened my spine further, refusing to shrink under their scrutiny. As I moved toward the ceremony space, I encountered the bridal party assembled for photos. Jessica's college friends Claire and Brittany greeted me with genuine warmth, but Bradley's cousins Madison, Tiffany, and Ashley barely acknowledged my presence. We were just discussing the bachelorette weekend in Napa, Madison said, twisting her diamond bracelet. It was absolute perfection. Such a shame you couldn't make it. I was otherwise engaged in Afghanistan, I replied evenly. Right, your army thing, Tiffany responded with a dismissive wave. Well, the spa treatments were divine. Jessica missed you, of course. Before I could correct her that Special Forces was hardly an army thing, Walter Marshall approached, champagne flute in hand. So you're the soldier sister, he said, looking me up and down as if inspecting a new recruit. Bradley mentioned you do something with logistics overseas? Special Forces, sir. Captain Alexandra Reynolds. The sir slipped out automatically, my military bearing taking over. Walter raised an eyebrow. Isn't that rather dangerous work for a young lady? Surely there are more suitable positions for women in the service. I had faced this particular battle many times before. The only suitable qualification for Special Forces is excellence, Mr. Marshall. Gender is irrelevant. His lips tightened, clearly unused to being challenged. Well, Jessica always did speak highly of your determination. I suppose every family has its unconventional member. As he walked away, I caught sight of Jessica finally emerging from the bridal suite. Despite everything, my heart swelled at the vision of my little sister in her wedding gown. She looked radiant, her happiness evident even from across the room. When she spotted me, she broke protocol to rush over, her elaborate dress rustling. "Alex, you made it." She embraced me tightly, careful not to wrinkle her gown. "God, I missed you. How was the flight back? Are you jet-lagged? Is that dress new? You look beautiful." For a moment, it was just the two of us again, sisters who had always had each other's backs. "You look absolutely stunning, Jess. I wouldn't have missed this for anything." Bradley appeared at her side, handsome in his custom tuxedo. "Captain Reynolds," he said with a nod that seemed almost respectful, though distant. "Thank you for making it back in time. Jessica was concerned about your travel schedule." "Military precision," I replied with a smile. "Congratulations to you both." Our moment was interrupted by the photographer calling for family pictures. "Just immediate family first," the photographer clarified, looking pointedly at me. "She is immediate family," Jessica insisted, grabbing my hand. "The schedule calls for parents and siblings with spouses," Margaret interjected smoothly. "We can do extended family and singles afterward if time permits." Jessica looked torn, caught between standing up for me and keeping peace on her wedding day. I squeezed her hand and stepped back. "It's fine, Jess. Protocol is protocol. I'll catch you after the ceremony." As guests began moving toward the ceremony space, I found my assigned seat in the back row. From this vantage point, I watched as the Marshall family positioned themselves prominently, their social hierarchy on full display. When Jessica walked down the aisle on our father's arm, I felt both immense pride and a strange sense of loss. The sister who had once helped me build forts in our backyard was joining a world that had little room for someone like me. Throughout the ceremony, I couldn't help noticing how every element emphasized traditional gender roles and family connections that made me feel increasingly alienated. The minister spoke at length about a wife's duty to support her husband's ambitions and the importance of producing children to continue the family legacy. Jessica and Bradley had written personalized vows, but even these seemed influenced by the Marshall family's expectations. As I watched my sister pledge her life to Bradley, I remembered our childhood promise to always be there for each other's big moments. I was physically present, but I'd never felt more like an outsider looking in on my own family. The reception began with an elaborate cocktail hour in the hotel's grand ballroom, where crystal chandeliers cast a golden glow over ice sculptures and towers of champagne. I accepted a glass from a passing server and positioned myself near a marble column, observing the social dynamics unfolding around me. The seating chart revealed itself to be a carefully orchestrated display of social hierarchy. The head table featured the bride, groom, their parents, and Bradley's brother Connor with his fiancée Stephanie. Radiating outward were tables of diminishing importance, with mine, table 19, positioned near the service entrance. So far from the main action, I might as well have been in a different time zone. My table mates included Jessica's former roommate who she hadn't spoken to in years, an elderly cousin of our father's, and 3 work colleagues who seemed surprised to have been invited at all. It was clear this was the table for obligatory invitations and social loose ends. "So you're Jessica's sister?" asked the woman beside me as we found our seats. "I'm Linda from Bradley's office." I didn't even know Jessica had a sister. "We're close, but I've been deployed overseas," I explained, trying to keep my tone neutral. "Deployed? Like, in the military?" Linda's eyebrows shot up. "How interesting. I didn't realize women could do that sort of thing." Before I could respond to this all-too-familiar comment, Bradley's cousin Madison sauntered over, champagne flute dangling from her manicured fingers. "Alexandra, right? I was just telling Aunt Margaret how brave you are, coming to a wedding alone at your age. I would simply die of embarrassment." Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "Isn't there anyone in the military you could have brought? Or do you find that men are intimidated by women in your position?" The implied criticism was clear. In the Marshall family worldview, A 32-year-old unmarried woman was an anomaly to be pitted or criticized. My focus has been on my career and service, I replied evenly. Not everyone measures success by marital status. Madison's smile tightened. Of course not, dear. We all make our choices. Some are just more traditional than others. She glanced meaningfully at my short hair. Anyway, do try to enjoy yourself. Such a shame you're stuck back here instead of with family. As she walked away, I overheard a conversation between Walter and Margaret Marshall at the edge of the nearby VIP section. Did you see Jessica's sister? Standing there like she's still on parade, Margaret whispered. Not quietly enough. What Bradley's grandparents must think. Military women always have that look about them. So severe. At least she had the sense to wear a dress and not show up in uniform. Walter replied. Though I'm not sure which would have been more embarrassing. Jessica assured me she'd be discreet about her unusual career. The way she carries herself is drawing attention. People are asking questions. It's making everyone uncomfortable. Well, she's seated far enough away. And it's just for one evening. After today, we'll only have to see her at major holidays. If that. Their dismissal stung more than I wanted to admit. I'd faced discrimination in the military, but it was usually from people who didn't know me. This was personal, targeted. And coming from people who were now technically my family. The toasts began, with Bradley's father Walter taking the microphone first. His speech focused almost exclusively on Bradley's accomplishments and the Marshall family legacy, with only passing mentions of Jessica as the beautiful woman who will support Bradley as he continues our family tradition of excellence. When he referenced Jessica's family, it was with the condescending tone of acknowledging their good fortune in connecting with the Marshalls. While the Reynolds family may not have our extensive history in this community, Walter said with a thin smile, we welcome them and appreciate the diverse perspectives they bring to our family circle. My knuckles whitened around my water glass as I caught the sideways glances directed at me during the word diverse. Jessica's face maintained a pleasant expression, but I recognized the slight tension around her eyes that indicated she was forcing her smile. As dinner progressed, I found myself increasingly isolated. Bradley's Aunt Eleanor cornered me at the dessert table, peering at me through her designer glasses. Alexandra, isn't it? I understand you're in the army. Yes, ma'am. Special Forces. How unusual. Don't you find that interferes with finding a husband and starting a family? At your age, that should be a priority. She didn't wait for my response before continuing. My niece Diana works with military families at the VA. Perhaps she could help you transition to a more appropriate civilian role? One that might help you adjust. Throughout the evening, I watched as Jessica was gradually separated from me by a constant rotation of Marshall family members requiring her attention. Each time she tried to make her way toward my table, someone intercepted her with a new introduction or photo opportunity. Bradley remained by her side, occasionally glancing in my direction with what might have been apologetic looks, but never intervening. After an hour of this treatment, I retreated to the restroom for a moment of solitude. Staring at my reflection in the ornate mirror, I took a deep breath. I'd faced enemy fire with less anxiety than this social battlefield. The skills that made me excellent in combat zones were useless here, where the weapons were whispers and the casualties were measured in dignity rather than blood. I thought about leaving early. Jessica was surrounded by her new family, and my presence seemed to be causing more tension than comfort. But then I remembered the promise we'd made as kids. I had missed so many moments because of my service. I couldn't miss this one, no matter how uncomfortable. When I returned to the reception, I found the situation had escalated further. The dance floor was now open and couples filled the space. When family dance was announced, I stood awkwardly at the periphery, watching as the Marshall extended family paired off elegantly. Bradley's 16-year-old brother danced with a cousin rather than having me, the bride's only sister included. Near the bar, I overheard Bradley's mother speaking to her sister. It's sad, really. These military women come back so damaged. Not just physically, but emotionally. How can they expect to have normal relationships after what they've seen and done? Jessica says her sister has nightmares. Not the kind of thing you want to introduce into a family, especially around future children. The casual cruelty of reducing my service and sacrifice to damage that made me unsuitable for family life hit harder than I expected. I had survived firefights and explosions, led teams through hostile territory, and received commendations for courage under fire. Yet here, in this glittering ballroom, I was being dismissed as broken and dangerous. Walter's voice carried from a nearby circle of business associates. Women in combat roles. It's political correctness gone mad. Disrupts unit cohesion and puts our boys at risk having to protect them. No offense to Jessica's sister, of course, but there are natural gender differences that the military tries to ignore. I gripped my water glass tighter, years of military discipline keeping me from responding. These people knew nothing about me or my service, yet felt entitled to judge both. Connor, Bradley's brother and best man, didn't bother lowering his voice as I passed. Did you see her walking alone? Dad says she's never had a serious relationship. Too busy playing soldier, I guess. Probably can't find a man who doesn't feel emasculated. With each comment, the weight on my chest grew heavier. Jessica remained surrounded by Marshall family members, too caught up in her special day to notice my increasing isolation. I stepped outside onto the terrace, gulping the cool evening air and seriously considering calling a taxi. My presence was clearly unwelcome, and staying felt like willingly standing in enemy fire. The elegant terrace offered temporary sanctuary from the judgmental atmosphere inside. Stars punctuated the clear night sky, reminding me of nights in Afghanistan when the vast desert darkness was broken only by distant pinpricks of light. Those stars had been a comfort during difficult missions. Tonight, they were silent witnesses to a different kind of pain. They can be pretty awful, can't they? I turned to find a teenage girl in a bridesmaid dress leaning against the stone railing. She looked about 16, with Bradley's eyes, but none of his family's arrogance. I'm Emily. Bradley's sister, she offered. You're Alexandra, right? Jessica's sister. Alex, I corrected automatically. Most people call me Alex. Emily nodded. I heard what my brother and his friends were saying. And what my parents said earlier. They're wrong, you know. Her directness was refreshing after hours of veiled insults. Thanks for saying so. They do this to everyone who doesn't fit their mold, Emily continued, twisting a bracelet around her wrist. My cousin Rachel brought her girlfriend to Christmas last year. Aunt Margaret referred to her as Rachel's roommate the entire time and seated them at opposite ends of the table. Sounds familiar, I said, gesturing toward the ballroom where table 19 stood in distant exile. Jessica's really nice, Emily said suddenly. She tries to include me when everyone else treats me like I'm invisible. She said you're a hero, that you've saved lives. The simple acknowledgement of my service, without judgment, brought an unexpected lump to my throat. I'm just doing my job. Well, I think it's cool. I've actually been looking into military academies, but don't tell my parents. They'd lose their minds. She glanced back toward the reception. We should probably go back in. The cake cutting is soon. I nodded, feeling marginally strengthened by this unexpected alliance. Thanks, Emily. For what? For being the first person tonight who didn't make me feel like an alien species. She grinned, suddenly looking younger. Aliens stick together. When we re-entered the ballroom, the situation had deteriorated further. Jessica was now cutting the cake with Bradley, surrounded by a wall of Marshall relatives. My sister caught my eye briefly, her expression conveying apology and helplessness as Margaret physically positioned her for the perfect photo opportunity, effectively blocking me from approaching. I found myself cornered by Bradley's Uncle George, a florid-faced man whose bow tie strained against his neck. He was clearly several drinks past propriety. So you're the lady soldier, he boomed, loud enough for nearby guests to turn. Must be strange for you, being at such a traditional event. All this celebration of marriage and family. I maintained my composure. I'm happy to celebrate my sister's special day. Of course, he continued, either missing or ignoring my attempt to end the conversation. Just a different world for you, I imagine. These modern women with their careers and independence. He made independence sound like a disease. End up alone, though, don't they? No offense intended, of course. Before I could respond, George raised his voice further. I'd like to propose a toast. He tapped his glass loudly, drawing attention from surrounding tables. To marriage and family values. The bedrock of society that some people, he glanced meaningfully at me, have forgotten in pursuit of other goals. Scattered laughter rippled through his immediate circle as glasses were raised. The implication was clear. My life choices were being held up as a cautionary tale, a deviation from the proper path for women. Jessica's face across the room showed conflict, torn between family loyalty and concern for me. Bradley whispered something in her ear, his hand on her waist, keeping her in place. Whether he was restraining her from coming to my defense or simply fulfilling his hosting duties was impossible to tell. I stood alone, acutely aware of being the only single person in a sea of couples, the only military officer in a room full of civilians who viewed my service as an eccentricity at best and a character flaw at worst. The Marshall family had systematically isolated me, diminished my accomplishments, and reduced me to an embarrassing footnote in their perfect family narrative. Years of military discipline had taught me to endure discomfort, to stand firm under pressure. But this wasn't combat. This was supposed to be a celebration, a joining of families. Instead, it felt like an orchestrated campaign to remind me that I didn't belong. As George's inappropriate toast concluded with more pointed looks in my direction, the room erupted in laughter. Not everyone was laughing at me specifically, but the cumulative effect of the evening made it impossible to feel otherwise. Jessica's expression had shifted from conflict to distress, her perfect day now marred by the obvious tension. My throat tightened as I fought back emotions that had no place in this setting. I had faced enemy fire, endured grueling training, and led teams through life-threatening situations, all without breaking. Yet somehow, the casual cruelty of these people who were now technically my family was testing my composure in ways combat never had. In that moment, standing alone while the room laughed around me, something inside me reached a breaking point. Not toward anger or confrontation, but toward a profound sadness that my presence was casting a shadow on Jessica's special day. I began calculating the quickest exit, planning to text Jessica later with an excuse about jet lag or not feeling well. But before I could move, the room's atmosphere shifted. The laughter died down as attention focused on something happening at the head table. An elderly man, who had been seated in a place of honor near Bradley's parents, was slowly rising to his feet. The ballroom fell silent as the elderly man stood. He must have been in his 90s, stooped with age but carrying himself with unmistakable dignity. His tuxedo hung somewhat loosely on his frame, but the row of military ribbons on his chest was unmistakable to anyone with service experience. I recognized the Distinguished Service Cross among them immediately. He took a moment to steady himself, refusing help from Bradley's father who half rose beside him. The room watched in curious silence as he deliberately walked across the space that separated us, his eyes fixed on me with unexpected intensity. As he approached, I automatically straightened to attention, military instinct kicking in at the presence of what was clearly a decorated senior veteran. He stopped directly in front of me, and for a moment, we simply regarded each other. Recognition passed between us, the unspoken understanding that exists between those who have served, regardless of generation or branch. Then, to my complete astonishment, he executed a formal bow. It was slightly stiff due to his age, but the intention was clear and deliberate. "Captain Alexandra Reynolds," he said, his voice stronger than his appearance suggested. "It is my honor to stand in the presence of a Silver Star recipient and Special Forces operator." Murmurs rippled through the room. Jessica's mouth had fallen open in surprise, while Margaret and Walter Marshall looked completely thunderstruck. "Sir," I managed, genuinely confused about how he knew these details. "Henry Marshall," he introduced himself. "Lieutenant Colonel. United States Army retired. Korean War and Vietnam. Bradley's great-uncle." He turned to address the now completely silent room. "I make it my business to know when I'm in the presence of distinguished service members. When Bradley mentioned his fiancée had a sister in the military, I did some research. He turned back to me. Your record is exemplary, Captain. Henry's gaze swept the room, lingering pointedly on George, Connor, and finally Walter and Margaret. Many of you have been whispering all evening about Captain Reynolds. Allow me to share what I discovered about our guest. My heart raced. My service record wasn't classified, but much of what I did was not for public consumption. Before I could politely intervene, Henry continued. 3 tours in active combat zones. Selected for special forces despite the extraordinary difficulty for women to qualify. Awarded the Silver Star for valor during an operation that saved the lives of 3 American aid workers under heavy enemy fire. He looked directly at George. While some of us were enjoying cocktails and business meetings, Captain Reynolds was putting her life on the line for strangers. That kind of courage deserves respect, not ridicule. The atmosphere in the room had transformed completely. Bradley was staring at me with new eyes, clearly hearing these details for the first time. Jessica's expression mixed pride with something like vindication. Walter and Margaret appeared stunned, their social script completely derailed. I didn't mean any disrespect, George muttered. His earlier confidence evaporated. Henry ignored him, keeping his focus on me. May I ask about the operation that earned you the Silver Star, Captain? As much as you're permitted to share, of course. Put on the spot, I hesitated before offering the sanitized version. Our team was extracting aid workers from a compromised location when we came under heavy fire. When our team leader was wounded, I assumed command and completed the mission with 0 civilian casualties. Leadership under fire, Henry nodded appreciatively. The truest test of character. He turned again to address the room. During the Korean War, I was part of an operation to evacuate civilians from an area under artillery bombardment. Different war, different enemy, but the same core mission. Protecting those who cannot protect themselves. The uniform changes, the weapons advance, but the courage required remains constant. With surprising agility for his age, Henry raised his glass. I'd like to propose a toast. To Captain Alexandra Reynolds. To service and sacrifice. To the quiet heroes among us who don't seek recognition but deserve it nonetheless. The room responded with raised glasses and a chorus of, to Captain Reynolds, the very same people who had been whispering behind my back now scrambling to show appropriate respect. Jessica was beaming through tears, while Bradley looked almost apologetic. Henry wasn't finished. He fixed Walter with a pointed stare. In our family, we claim to value tradition and excellence. Captain Reynolds exemplifies both. The tradition of service to something greater than oneself, and the excellence required to succeed in one of the military's most demanding roles. Walter appeared properly chastised, while Margaret's face had drained of color. Now, Henry said, turning back to me. Protocol dictates that a decorated officer should be seated at the family table, not exiled to the periphery. Walter, I believe we can correct this oversight immediately. Without waiting for a response, Henry offered me his arm. Captain, would you do me the honor? The entire reception watched as I was escorted to the family table, where Bradley's father hurriedly instructed staff to bring another chair. I caught Jessica's eye as she mouthed thank you to her elderly savior. As I took my seat, the dynamics of the entire evening shifted. What had been a hostile environment suddenly transformed into something entirely unexpected. Henry settled beside me, leaning in to speak privately. I hope you don't mind my intervention, Captain. Some battles require different tactics than others. Thank you, sir, I replied sincerely. Though I'm curious how you found out about the Silver Star. That operation wasn't widely publicized. He smiled slightly. I still have friends at the Pentagon. When Bradley mentioned his future sister-in-law was in Special Forces, I was intrigued. Not many women make it that far. I made a few calls. That's quite thorough reconnaissance, sir. Military habit. Know the terrain before you enter it. He glanced around the table. And this terrain has been in need of disruption for some time. Too much emphasis on appearance. Not enough on substance. For the first time that evening, I felt something close to belonging. Not because I suddenly fit into the Marshall family mold, but because someone had finally seen me for who I actually was, rather than who they assumed me to be. The reconfigured seating arrangement at the family table created a ripple effect throughout the reception. Walter Marshall, clearly thrown off balance by his uncle's intervention, attempted an awkward apology as I took my seat. "Captain Reynolds, it seems we've underestimated your accomplishments. The family meant no disrespect to your service." His words were correct, but his tone suggested this was more about saving face than genuine remorse. I chose the path of professionalism rather than confrontation. "Thank you, Mr. Marshall. I understand military service isn't familiar territory for everyone." My voice was polite but firm, establishing boundaries while leaving room for improved relations. Margaret Marshall's reaction was more complex. She repeatedly glanced between Henry and me, clearly recalibrating her assessment in real time. The woman who had dismissed me as damaged goods hours earlier now seemed uncertain how to proceed when faced with her husband's uncle's obvious respect for me. "Alexandra," she finally said, stumbling slightly over my full name. "I hope you'll forgive any misunderstandings earlier. We simply didn't realize the extent of your position." "It's Alex, actually," I corrected gently. "And my position is just my job. What matters is that we're all here to celebrate Jessica and Bradley." Jessica, seated across from me, was radiant with vindication. After hours of watching her torn between family obligations and sisterly loyalty, she could finally embrace both simultaneously. Bradley, to his credit, appeared genuinely interested as he leaned forward. "Alex, I had no idea you'd received the Silver Star. Jessica mentioned you were in Special Forces, but not the details. It's not something I discuss much in civilian settings," I explained. "Tonight is about you and Jessica, not my career." "Still, it's impressive," Bradley continued, seeming to see me clearly for the first time. "My grandfather served in Korea with Uncle Henry. The military tradition means a lot to our family, historically speaking." The irony of this statement after an evening of military service being treated as an embarrassing career choice wasn't lost on me, but I appreciated what seemed like a genuine attempt at connection. As dinner continued, family members who had previously avoided me suddenly found reasons to approach. Connor, who had mockingly called me the soldier sister earlier, now awkwardly asked about training requirements for Special Forces. Walter's business associates, who had nodded along to his dismissive comments about women in combat roles, now introduced themselves with respectful handshakes. The most genuine interaction came when Bradley's sister Emily returned, sitting beside me with an enormous grin. "That was amazing," she whispered. "Uncle Henry never speaks up at family events. He usually just observes and looks disappointed." "I'm grateful for his intervention," I admitted. "Everyone's attitude completely changed," Emily noted. "It's so fake. They're the same people who were laughing at Uncle George's toast half an hour ago." Her teenage perception was sharp. "People often respect what they understand," I offered. Uncle Henry gave them a framework they could recognize. Throughout the evening, Henry remained nearby, occasionally sharing stories of his own service that paralleled my experiences despite the decades between them. When the band played a classic from his era, he turned to me with unexpected lightness. "Would an old soldier be presumptuous to ask for a dance with a young captain?" The dance floor cleared somewhat as Henry led me in a simple but dignified box step. His posture, despite his age, retained the straight-backed discipline of military bearing. As we moved, he spoke quietly. "Your generation has opportunities we never imagined. Women in combat roles in Special Forces. The old guard resists, but excellence eventually silences critics." "Not always," I replied. "Sometimes excellence just makes them more determined to find fault." "True enough," he acknowledged. "I faced my share of resistance returning from Korea. People who hadn't served had very firm opinions about those who had." He glanced toward Walter. "My nephew included. Born into privilege. Never understood why I chose service over running the family business." When the dance ended, applause rippled through the reception. Whether for Henry's spry movements at his age or for the symbolic acceptance the dance represented was unclear, but the atmosphere had undeniably shifted. Jessica found a moment to pull me aside, hugging me tightly. "I'm so sorry about how they treated you," she whispered. "I should have said something sooner." "It's your wedding day," I reminded her. "You shouldn't have to referee family dynamics." Still, she insisted, "You're my sister. No matter what fancy name I'm taking, that doesn't change." Bradley approached, looking genuinely contrite. "Alex, I owe you an apology. I heard some of the comments earlier and didn't step in. I was trying to keep the peace, but I should have spoken up." His acknowledgement was unexpected but welcome. "I appreciate that, Bradley. New family dynamics take adjustment on all sides." As the evening progressed, I found myself in the unfamiliar position of educator rather than outsider. Guests who had previously avoided me now asked questions about military life, women in combat roles, and the reality of deployment. I shared what I could, careful to respect operational security while giving them genuine insight into a world most of them had only seen through movies or news clips. Even Walter eventually approached with what appeared to be sincere interest. "Henry speaks highly of your record," he began, somewhat stiffly. "I've perhaps been uninformed about the realities of modern military service." "It's a common misconception," I replied diplomatically. "The military has evolved significantly, even in the last decade." "Indeed." He paused, seeming to struggle with his next words. "My father served in World War II. He rarely spoke of it, and I perhaps developed a certain distance from that legacy. Focused more on business success than service." This glimpse of vulnerability from the previously dismissive patriarch was surprising. "Different generations serve in different ways," I offered. Walter nodded, though his expression suggested my words had landed more deeply than intended. "Nevertheless, I owe you an apology for certain comments made earlier. They reflected prejudice rather than understanding." His public acknowledgement, while clearly difficult for him, demonstrated a capacity for growth I hadn't expected. "Apology accepted. We're family now. That means learning about each other, differences and all." By the time the reception began winding down, the Marshall family's attitude had undergone a remarkable transformation. Not everyone's opinions had genuinely changed, of course. Some were simply responding to the social cues provided by Henry's endorsement. But the hostile environment had dissipated, replaced by something that, if not quite acceptance, at least resembled respect. As Jessica and Bradley prepared to leave for their honeymoon, my sister embraced me one final time. "You know what's amazing," she whispered. "You didn't have to say a word to defend yourself. Your character spoke for itself." I watched as they departed amid sparklers and cheers, feeling a complex mix of emotions. The evening had been a battlefield of a different sort than I was accustomed to, but perhaps the victory was sweeter for being unexpected. 6 months after Jessica's wedding, I found myself back at the Marshall family estate for a Sunday dinner. What had once seemed like hostile territory now felt, if not exactly comfortable, at least navigable. The transformation hadn't happened overnight, but through a series of small moments and gradual understanding that began the night Henry Marshall had changed the narrative. Jessica and Bradley had returned from their honeymoon to establish their new life together in a renovated brownstone halfway between the Marshall family neighborhood and my apartment. This geographic compromise mirrored the emotional balancing act we were all learning to perform. "Alex, you made it," Jessica greeted me at the door, her face lighting up. She was glowing with newlywed happiness, her relationship with Bradley having deepened since their wedding. "Uncle Henry's been asking when you'd arrive." Henry had become an unexpected fixture in my life. What began as mutual respect between service members had evolved into a friendship that bridged generations. We met for coffee when my schedule allowed, exchanging stories and perspectives on military life across the decades. His Korean War experiences echoed my own in surprising ways, despite the years between them. Inside the dining room, Margaret Marshall was directing staff in setting the table with the same precision she applied to all family functions. When she spotted me, she approached with what appeared to be genuine warmth. Alexandra, welcome. We've placed you next to Henry. He mentioned you two were discussing military history last time. The woman who had once whispered about my masculine appearance and damaged status now made consistent efforts to connect. Her evolution wasn't just about saving face after Henry's intervention. She seemed genuinely interested in understanding the world her new daughter-in-law came from. Thank you, Margaret. I brought the wine Jessica suggested. I handed her the bottle, noting how our interactions had evolved from strained politeness to something approaching genuine. Walter entered from his study, extending his hand in greeting. Captain, good to see you again. Henry mentioned you're considering a training position stateside. I'm weighing my options, I confirmed. After 4 deployments, I'm eligible for a rotation to instructor duties if I choose. Walter nodded thoughtfully. The business world could also benefit from your leadership experience, should you ever consider transitioning to civilian life. This practical acknowledgement of my skills rather than fixation on my gender represented significant growth from the man who had questioned whether combat roles were appropriate for women. The most surprising development of the past months had been my connection with Henry's grandson Michael, a medical researcher who had attended the wedding but whom I hadn't met during the chaos of that evening. We had been introduced at a subsequent family gathering and discovered unexpected common ground in our dedication to high-pressure careers that required absolute precision. Michael arrived shortly after me, his smile warming when our eyes met. What had begun as friendly conversation had evolved into regular dinner dates and long walks discussing everything from advances in combat medicine to the challenge of maintaining personal identity within the Marshall family orbit. I brought the book we discussed, he said quietly, handing me a volume on military strategy. Grandfather's influence. He's thrilled we're spending time together. Bradley's sister Emily bounded into the room, her enthusiasm unchanged from our first meeting on the terrace. At 17, she had grown more confident in her divergence from family expectations and now openly discussed her interest in military service. Alex, did you bring the West Point brochures you promised? Mom's finally agreed to let me attend the summer program. Margaret's sigh was audible, but lacked the disapproval it might once have carried. I still think Georgetown would provide more appropriate options, but Emily insists on exploring all avenues. This compromise represented enormous progress. The family that had once mocked my military career now begrudgingly supported Emily's interest in following a similar path. Dinner conversation flowed more naturally than I could have imagined 6 months earlier. Connor, whose jokes about women playing soldier had once cut deep, now asked thoughtful questions about military structure and leadership principles he could apply in his corporate role. The chain of command seems more efficient than our management hierarchy, he observed. Clear responsibilities, defined reporting structures. It works because it's built on mutual respect and competence, I explained. Rank demands courtesy, but genuine respect is earned through demonstrated ability. Bradley, who had initially seemed torn between his family's attitudes and respect for Jessica's connection to me, had found his own balance. Alex has been helping me understand Jessica's independent streak better, he admitted. The Reynolds sisters were raised to stand their ground. Jessica laughed. Translation: I'm no longer just nodding along with every Marshall family tradition without discussion. The most profound transformation, however, was evident when Jessica pulled me aside after dinner, leading me to the garden terrace. I have news, she whispered, her expression a mix of excitement and uncertainty. I'm pregnant. About 10 weeks along. Joy rushed through me as I embraced my sister. Jess, that's wonderful. How are you feeling? Nervous. Excited. Terrified. She laughed. But here's the thing. We just told Bradley's parents, and do you know what Margaret asked first? If we would consider naming you as the baby's godmother. The significance of this wasn't lost on me. The woman who had once considered me an embarrassment to her family now wanted me to have a formal role in her grandchild's life. That's unexpected, I managed. It was her idea, not Bradley's. Jessica insisted. She said the baby should have strong role models from both families. Someone who exemplifies courage and commitment. 3 months later, we gathered for a more somber occasion. Henry Marshall had passed away peacefully in his sleep, leaving behind a legacy of service and quiet dignity. The funeral was attended by military colleagues from across generations, a testament to the connections he had maintained throughout his life. During the private family gathering after the service, Bradley's father approached me with an unexpected request. Henry left specific instructions, Walter explained, holding a polished wooden box. He wanted you to have these. Inside the box lay Henry's military medals, including his Distinguished Service Cross. Accompanying them was a handwritten note to Captain Alexandra Reynolds. May these remind you that courage is timeless and respect is earned. Your presence in our family has been a gift. Lieutenant Colonel Henry Marshall, Ret. The months following Henry's passing brought more changes. I accepted the training position stateside, reducing my deployment schedule while allowing me to continue serving. My relationship with Michael deepened, built on mutual respect and understanding rather than the social expectations that drove many Marshall family connections. Perhaps the most meaningful development came through my interaction with other female service members. Drawing from my experience at Jessica's wedding, I established a support network for women veterans transitioning to civilian settings, helping them navigate the unique social challenges we faced. 1 year after Jessica's wedding, we gathered at the same church for her daughter's christening. I stood as godmother to little Catherine Alexandra Marshall, named partially in my honor. The church was filled with familiar faces, but the atmosphere couldn't have been more different from the tension-filled wedding. Margaret Marshall, now a doting grandmother, adjusted Catherine's christening gown with the same attention to detail she brought to all family occasions. She has your determined expression, Alexandra, she observed. Strong-willed already. Walter nodded in agreement. The best of both families in one small package. As I held my niece during the ceremony, I reflected on the journey of the past year. The woman who had stood alone amidst whispers and judgment at her sister's wedding now stood surrounded by genuine respect and acceptance. Not because I had changed to fit their expectations, but because they had expanded their understanding to include my reality. Jessica squeezed my hand as we posed for family photos afterward. Remember how they couldn't even include you in the wedding pictures? Now look. The photographer arranged us in configurations that naturally included me, Michael, and the bridges we had built between our different worlds. The Marshall family portrait had evolved to embrace differences rather than enforce conformity. Later, as guests mingled at the reception, Bradley's cousin Madison approached, her expression more genuine than I'd ever seen it. I owe you an apology, she said directly. My comments at the wedding were cruel and small-minded. I've been thinking a lot about why I felt the need to put you down for being different. Her self-awareness surprised me. What conclusions did you reach? That I was insecure, she admitted. Your confidence and accomplishments made me question my own choices. It was easier to mock what I didn't understand than to examine my own life. This moment of genuine connection represented the deeper lesson of the past year. True dignity doesn't demand recognition, it eventually commands it. The respect I had earned came not from conforming to the Marshall family expectations, but from standing firmly in my own truth until they could see its value. As the christening celebration continued around me, I found a quiet moment to reflect on this journey. The military had taught me to face external threats with courage, but navigating the battlefield of family dynamics had required a different kind of bravery. The bridges built between these different worlds weren't just for my benefit, but for Catherine's generation, who would grow up seeing that strength comes in many forms. Have you ever stood your ground when it felt like everyone was judging you for being different? Or found an unexpected ally when you felt most alone? Share your story in the comments below. And if this journey of finding acceptance without compromising who you are resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share with someone who might need to hear that staying true to yourself eventually earns the right kind of respect. Thank you for listening to my story. And remember that sometimes the people who initially judge you the most harshly can become your most surprising supporters when they finally see you for who you truly are.